What is the thinking behind this book? What are you hoping it will achieve?
I hope that this book can be both a kind of go-to source for getting information about the climate crisis and what to do next, but I also hope that it's going to be some kind of call to action, because I believe that once we have the information we need, once we fully understand the climate crisis, that we will know what to do, and then people will want to take action.
And yet it paints a very bleak picture of how things are.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were to sum up where you think the world is in terms of climate now, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, we are approaching a precipice. There's no denying that. We are in a very urgent state right now. We have a very limited time in order to achieve very big changes to avert the worst consequences of the climate crisis. People are already suffering today, and it's going to get much worse. We are moving deeper into uncharted territory. So that's kind of where we are right now. But I don't think that, as you say, it paints up a quite bleak picture. But I think that that is what we need right now. I don't think we need to sort of soothe people and give them false hope by painting up some kind of false scenario that we can fix this without having to make any major changes. I believe that what is really hopeful right now is to tell it like it is, because we can only act if we actually understand the situation.
And yet you've been telling it like it is, with real power for the last couple of years, and all the evidence suggests we're still going in the wrong direction. The report from the UN just this week suggesting that the target of 1.5 may be dead already.
I mean, I don't think it's that is the fault of the climate movement. I think that right now we are in general, people are very unaware of the crisis that is happening.
Even now?
I mean, it's like people know that something is wrong, but they don't know really how wrong it is, and they don't know exactly what it means. We know that the planet is warming because of increased anthropogenic greenhouse gases, and that may lead to more extreme weather events in the future, but we don't really know what that means in terms of human suffering. We don't really know what that means in the long run. But the worst part is that we don't even understand that we do not understand.
Of course, it's not the fault of the climate movement, the environmental movement. But I just wondered, you tear your hair out in frustration at how you have been talking very vocally across a global stage for a number of years now.
Yeah.
And yet the statistics show this move in the wrong direction.
Yeah. Of course, it's... I mean, I'm only 19, and I already feel like a broken record, repeating the same message over and over again. But that's unfortunately is the role of activists, to continue saying the same things over and over again until people listen, until what we are actually saying is being taken into account, into full consideration. Even if it's very uncomfortable, and of course it might feel like it's hopeless sometimes, but we have to keep going either way, because giving up is simply not an option.
I mean, one of the depressing things is that timeline, you know, that none of this is new. It talks about pledges made long before you were born, back in 1992. Pledges unmet, endless conferences, COPs, more new pledges, more unmet pledges. How do you keep hope?
I think that hope is a verb. I think that hope is something you do and that you need to earn. I don't think that hope is something that we should expect being given to us passively by not doing anything. It seems like people are so obsessed with asking, is there hope, because otherwise we won't be able to do anything, when it's exactly the opposite. When we actually do something, we will create the hope that we need. I
mean, you look at, say, COP, you know, we're a week away from the next COP climate crisis conference in Egypt. Last year, the one that was hosted here, you called it the Global North Greenwashing Festival. You know, the fact that it's finally being held on the African continent, where they are arguably facing the direct consequences of climate change right now, sometimes in the most terrible way. Do you think the fact they're hosting in Egypt means that it will be a better conference, means it will achieve more?
I mean, there are many layers to that. Of course, it could be a way for example, the issues of loss and damage funding to get more attention. But also we have to remember that Egypt is a nation which violates many of the basic human rights, and they have political prisoners, etc. So there are many layers to that.
Last year, as I say, we hosted COP here. We made a huge thing about it politically. You know, there was an awful lot of coverage about it. This year, our new Prime Minister has just said he won't be going. What do you make of that?
I mean, of course, that's individual decisions like that. I'm sure they have a reason. I mean, I don't think we should be focusing too much on individual events like this. But of course, when we see a pattern that the most powerful people in the world don't seem to prioritize the climate crisis as much as they should, of course, that's a sign that they have other things they want to do.
I mean, the messaging is important, isn't it?
It is, it is.
And on that messaging, the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, says he is going. So we have the current Prime Minister saying he won't be going.
Yeah.
And the former Prime Minister saying, well, I will, you know, this is really important to me. He's a huge figure, attracts a lot of attention.
Yeah.
Is that valuable? Is that a positive thing? Is he making the right decision compared to Prime Minister Sunak?
I mean, I don't know. As I said, individual events and decisions like these are maybe irrelevant in the full picture, but we also must remember that as it is now, the COPs will not really lead to any massive changes. They are not really designed to lead to any big changes. I mean, last year, the fossil fuel lobby had more representatives than any other nation, so that kind of shows how serious we are taking this. So just going to COP is maybe not enough to show that I'm paying attention to this.
And yet, in a way, I suppose COP is the only sort of governmental show in town, if you like.
It's an important event to mobilise around.
We're talking about the individuals. The new king first spoke out about his fears for the environment, about climate change, back in the 60s. And he admits that he was viewed, in his own words, as potty. You know, do you feel an affinity to King Charles, who spoke out about it, was regarded as balmy, you know, was isolated? Do you feel some affinity for that role that he took?
I mean, sure. Also, again, I don't think we should be focusing too much on individual people like these.
I mean, you know the work that he's done. Would you like to see him go because the messaging carries some weight?
I don't know. I don't see what a Swedish teenager's opinion on a British monarch is relevant.
I suppose whether he's a valuable voice to the cause.
I mean, could be, definitely.
I mean, one of the things that the book highlights really powerfully is that sort of terrible cycle of pledges made, the media's role in that, you know, lauding the pledges. Then when they're unmet, you say that the media are silent and there's more distraction by new pledges that are again unmet. It's a terrible sort of, almost like a conspiracy, you argue, that this is what creates catastrophe.
I mean, I wouldn't say conspiracy, but yeah, it's a very vicious cycle when maybe not the most striking thing about the climate emergency is what is going to happen in the future, or what might happen in the future, but rather that all that is happening now is happening completely legal and that hardly anyone is reacting. And also when they are not getting away, when they are getting away with it and not being held accountable, that is a very vicious cycle, which is a very good recipe for catastrophe, I would say.
And the argument at the moment, for example, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says he's not going because we have a crisis here on our doorstep right now. And you'll recognise that across the world, the cost of living crisis. You know, in the UK, it's the worst we've seen for decades. Is that an understandable answer for not going to COP, for saying, you know, there's a crisis right now that I need to solve?
I mean, looking away from the aspect of going to COP or not, of course, we are facing multiple crises at the same time that, of course, need to be dealt with as well. But we cannot continue to focus only on these things at the expense of many, many other very, very important and urgent issues that also need our full attention. We need to be able to have more than one thing in our heads at the same time.
It can't be, in your view, an either-or.
No, we need to have a holistic picture when we look, a holistic approach when we look at all these crises that we face and solve them together, because they are, for example, the climate crisis is only a system of a much larger crisis, the Anthropocene, and etc. And we cannot expect to solve one of these crises without also addressing the others.
I suppose for the millions of people in the UK who are really, really struggling at the moment, they're struggling with the cost of energy, they're struggling with the cost of food. Do you understand why in their minds the climate crisis may feel like something they cannot even face to think about, because they have an emergency on their doorstep right now?
Yes, of course. And unfortunately, that's the way we have let it become when we have waited so long with addressing the climate emergency that we don't really see the connections between different issues. And but we also have to remember that for many others, for countless of other people around the world, the climate crisis is their emergency at the doorstep. And by ignoring it, we are making this much worse for them.
So you have some sympathy for individuals who may feel this is too big for me right now.
Of course.
But it's for governments to...
Yeah, the climate crisis is not something that can be solved by individuals acting alone.
And that in a sense, is difficult, isn't it? Because for young people, say, they want to feel, I can play a role in this. But the reality, if I understand you correctly, is that it's got to be solved at government level. It's got to be solved at a global level. Yeah,
of course. It needs to be all of them, on every possible level. Of course, the most important level is a systemic level, a structural level. But we also cannot expect that to happen without also civil society engaging, without countless of individuals also engaging.
Because you say in the book as well that democracy is the most valuable tool we have, despite huge and very valid criticism of governments around the world failing to grasp the seriousness of this crisis.
And I think that's exactly why it's the only tool, it's the best tool that we have. Because as it is right now, it seems like the people in power will do whatever they can as long as they can get away with it. They will go as far as possible unless they have a massive pressure from the outside. And right now, they don't have that. We are many who are raising our voices for these causes, but we are not nearly enough. So if we can be that pressure, then they will have other priorities and they will think twice about the things they do.
I want to move on to the issue of activists in a moment, but just for a second, just on that response from governments. If you look, for example, at the cost of living crisis, the great terrible irony, I suppose, is that our government is spending billions supporting, the gas bills, paying for gas to help people survive the winter, which is arguably in the long term another problem in the long-term crisis.
Yeah, definitely. We cannot expect we cannot expect us to solve the problems we have now by throwing the future under the bus completely. We need to think holistically and long term and have solutions that work for both of these crises.
I mean, I know you're not a politician, but in terms of the energy crisis now, do you accept that, for example, helping support people pay their energy bills is just the necessary evil at this moment? Or is there other things that you think in the short term the government could do?
As you say, I'm not a politician and I'm not from the UK, so I think that is something that should be dealt with here. But of course, as I said before, when we talk about these issues, we need to think long term, because continued investments in this would either, long term, become stranded assets or will lock in a level of warming that we will not be able to adapt to. And then the consequences that we will have to deal with later on will probably be much worse than what we are suffering now.
And that idea in the book of, these problems baking in more serious issues down the line.
Yeah.
And just in terms of the energy crisis that we see, partly because of the war in Ukraine, there's a terrible irony there as well in terms of it has taken away climate from the top of the news agenda, but at the same time, it has put real focus on our dependency on oil and particularly gas, and actually may bring about some change in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, it's of course a horrible tragedy has brought about unspeakable sufferings, but it does really show the dangers of being completely dependent on fossil fuels in these kind of situations.
But it has put a real focus on that perhaps
exactly.
all the campaigning and the arguing, it shows that governments will listen if they are forced to face a particular crisis or an emergency.
Yeah, I mean, that's also what we saw with the corona pandemic. Yeah, if there is an emergency and that is being treated as an emergency, we can act and, yeah.
I mean, the COVID pandemic is a very, very good example, isn't it? You know, governments across the world brought in emergency measures, whether they were popular or not, because they say we have no choice.
Yeah.
Do you think they could approach the environment crisis in the same way?
I mean, of course, it's difficult to compare because they require such different measures. But I think that with the same level of urgency, we need to face all these crises that we face now.
You talk in the book about the role of the media. We've touched on it a little bit, you know, the idea that, you know, they don't push hard enough when these pledges are unmet. They laud and celebrate when pledges are made, given that we know the history of pledges can be meaningless, ultimately. In the interests of balance, you know, we often see perhaps people who question the science, climate deniers, you know, this both-sidisms. How damaging do you think that is?
I think it's very damaging. I do think that it's getting a bit better, but we are still very, very far away from where we need to be. I mean, before it used to be people who say that climate change is real versus, I mean, straight-on climate change deniers. And now it's more like the future of the planet versus economic growth very often. For example, this mine will be built here. It will wipe out the ecosystems. It will cause damage to many things that will not be replaceable, and etc. Versus it will create 100 new jobs, and then we have to prioritize. We have to choose like which side we agree with, rather than it should be both at the same time. We can have jobs and care for the planet at the same time, and that I think that's very damaging when these sides are being put against each other. And
do you think then that there's an argument that, as you say, it's a more nuanced debate now? It's less climate denial against, you know, the climate science is factual. But do you think this idea of giving both sides airtime is wrong?
I mean, what do you mean both sides?
So it's a more nuanced argument now. You don't necessarily have out-and-out climate deniers, but this binary that they put forward very often is, well, we either go for a green future.
Do you mean like either scientists or lobbyists?
Yeah, or the argument about jobs, for example.
Yeah.
You know, well, we need this mine because it will create jobs.
I think that when we need to approach everything with having all the things that we have now in mind, that we cannot think only jobs versus climate, planet, future of humanity, or whatever you may call it. I think that we need to have a more nuanced picture, as you say, and say that we can have all these things, but not at the expense of...
So it's not about banning those voices, but perhaps arguing the case better, or...
Yeah, and not letting lobbyists have as much airtime as they have now, who only represent financial interests.
When we were talking about democracy earlier on, you talked about the importance of activists, and you say, you know, we need billions of climate activists. Are they out there, or is the reality that there are too many of us, as you say in the book, that don't want to give up the comfort of overconsumption? Are we too fundamentally selfish?
I would say that there are billions of potential activists out there, climate activists, and the need for climate activists will not reduce. In the future, it will only become more and more dire. I think if we treat the climate crisis in the right way, as we should, if we treat it like an emergency, people will understand that what we are experiencing now is something that requires us to take action. It's not something that we can continue to postpone, delay, or distract from, but that we are needed right here, right now. And also, if other people around us take action, that will also have snowball effects on us and affect us, as many scientists write in the book, that social norms can change, and when some people decide to take action, many others will follow.
And the type of action matters, presumably. As you say in the book, you say, non-violent, peaceful demonstrations, civil disobedience that doesn't risk the safety of others. You'll know Extinction Rebellion and Just Stop Oil say they're non-violent. But there are many people who argue their actions are harmful, stopping ambulances get to hospital, or blocking roads when people need to get to work, or destroying artwork. Is that the type of action that you think is valuable or counterproductive?
I mean, it's difficult to talk about these because all these actions are so different, and all these movements are also so different. So it's difficult to generalize. But I mean, overall, I think that people are becoming very, very desperate, and that's something that we should have been expecting. And since we have never faced anything like this before, people are going to try out many, many different methods, and since nothing else has been working, they will try new things.
But that question of what constitutes harm is an important one, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, harm as in endangering another individual, or harm as in causing some disturbance or like minor disruptions, it's of course a very big scale.
So stopping an ambulance get to hospital would be at one end of the scale, perhaps.
And that's of course something that we cannot be doing because we cannot harm other people.
But stopping people to get to work, if you hold up a van driver, he may lose several hours' money. That's a harm.
Yeah.
But would that be acceptable?
It depends. I cannot speak
And gluing yourself to artwork, a valuable, valid way of activism to draw attention to the cause?
That's not. I mean, it's not up for me to say, because the climate crisis is very broad, and it's not like one person has the right to say that you're doing the wrong thing and so on. But I do also think that we need to realize what kind of privilege we have when the only way not the only way, but the most significant way we are approached to the climate and to the climate emergency is by someone blocking a road.
That level of disruption compared to what people in other parts of the world...
lost houses, lost lives and livelihoods.
I just wonder, recently it's sort of fed into this political narrative. I don't know whether you saw it, that suggests it's all tofu-eating woke nonsense of the privileged. Does that worry you at all, or what do you think about that sort of characterization of people fighting for the climate?
I mean, there's some kind of misconception that it's only privileged people who can afford to care about the climate. And that's a very westernized picture. When we look at the global scale, most people living on the front lines, I mean, most people who are affected by the climate crisis, and many of the people who are leading the fight against it are the ones actually living on the front lines. They are not these tofu-eating privileged people in the UK, but rather many indigenous peoples all over the world who are in many cases risking their lives and freedom, fighting against this destruction.
And that part of the problem is that they haven't been allowed...
Yeah, exactly. They are not
airtime.
They are not being heard. They are not on the front pages, even though they are living on the front lines.
I just wanted to, I know we're coming close to the end now, but I just wonder whether you've become a global figure and, literally put climate change and the environment on the front pages across the world. But I wonder, has it come at a cost? I mean, none of it can be easy. The front pages may be fine, but you've had to put up with horrible trolling, death threats to your family, as I understand it. I mean, do you ever think this is taking too much out of me?
No, I mean, of course, it can be a lot to do and a lot that you have to deal with sometimes. But I mean, thinking about the trolling, for example, I mean, that's not really something that's difficult to deal with. It's just if you aren't even reading the comments, then it doesn't bother you. But I do think that the positive effects of this much more outweigh the negative effects, because it gives me, as I said, hope is something that you need to do, and doing something makes me feel at least hopeful in one way. Without doing that, without being an activist, I don't know, I would maybe fall into despair or thinking that nothing can be done. But now when I'm actually taking action, it feels like we can do something about it. It feels meaningful.
You talked in the past about it giving you purpose.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think that today we don't really have enough purpose in our lives, at least speaking from many people I know. It's like we are running around in this endless hamster wheel, trying to fulfill the expectations of others, and trying to, whatever it may be, make money or gain followers on social media or so on, and that doesn't really mean anything. But when you have something to fight for, something that actually means something, it gives you a purpose.
And the fact is, as you say very starkly in the book, that you can keep fighting and still have to live with the disappointment of things maybe not moving in the right direction, certainly not quickly enough.
Yeah. But
there aren't days where you wake up and think, do you know what, I should just do something else, or I should focus more on me, or...
No, I mean, I do other things as well, of course. But I mean, we have to remember that this is a marathon and not a sprint. I kind of knew when I got into this that this is something that we're going to have to do for a long time, because things that we are advocating, like major transformational system changes, are not going to happen overnight.
And just in terms of that, you know, you're in it for the long haul. What happens next? Do you have to change the way you're, you know, what you do, or, you know, if you're looking back and thinking, you know, we're not getting the change quick enough, do you change the way you operate?
Maybe.
How?
I mean, for example, writing this book is a change, because we've talked about we need a system change, and we have referred to these things, but at least I haven't been given enough time to actually explain what we mean and giving voice to those who actually have important things to say about this. But here is an opportunity to actually explain it in a more thoroughly way. And I see it as a form of activism, because whatever platform I have, I use it in order to bring attention to the climate crisis and so on. So this is one way of doing that.
And you've explained what you feel about hope, that question that you're asked all the time. I wonder, do you still have faith in humanity, in people?
I mean, not everyone, but I think having spent so much time in the climate movement, meeting so many incredible people from all over the world, fighting for the same cause, that makes me feel hopeful that people can act. There are so many people who are really willing to fight for this, and that gives me hope. And also when enough people come together, we can achieve almost anything. And also, I hope that there might be positive tipping points. We talk often about these negative tipping points, but I think that there are social tipping points, for example, that we might already have crossed. We don't know. We can't really predict anything like that.
And so you have hope. What brings you joy, finally?
What brings me joy is to of course see results of what we're doing, but joy also just much joy in other activists, and the community that we have, which is I'm very proud of that we have created.
I'm proud of what you've done so far. Not over yet, but...
Yeah. I mean, In that way, yes, but I don't really measure those things in being proud of or not. When it comes to activism, it's more like this is a moral duty. I am privileged enough to have the possibility of doing something, and therefore I need to do something for as long as I can, as much as I can. So it's yeah.
Greta Thunberg, thank you so much for talking to us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you too.